You ever wake up in your own home and smell smoke, but not the kind from a fire, the kind from a war about to start? That was me last January. Just 2 days after New Year's, I walked into my living room with a cup of coffee and noticed the air smelled off. Not like wood smoke from my fireplace, but like something was cooking in the chimney. And not in a good way. I'm Paxton Velman. 43, single dad, former contractor turned home inspector. I know my house like the back of my hand. So when the chimney started acting weird, I knew something was wrong. I threw on a hoodie and climbed up to the roof. What I saw made me freeze. There was a thick steel cap bolted over the top of my chimney. No smoke was escaping. Actually, it was worse than that. I could see a faint plume leaking from the sides, clinging to the brick like a trapped ghost. Someone had blocked it, deliberately. I didn't need a detective to tell me who done it. Nancy Harrow, head of the Willow Creek HOA. She was the kind of woman who could spot a non-regulation mailbox from 2 streets away and raise hell about it before you could say neighborhood compliance. Bleach blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a purse that probably cost more than my first truck. She was the self-proclaimed queen of our cul-de-sac, and she hated me. Ever since I refused to pay her dumb, holiday aesthetic fee for not putting up white-only lights during Christmas, she'd been looking for ways to get back at me. She fined me for having my truck parked in my own driveway, said it was commercial-looking. She once knocked on my door because my lawn gnome was too whimsical. But this, blocking my chimney, that was dangerous. I climbed down, grabbed my phone, and started taking photos. The cap, the bolts, the smoke stains, the soot backup in the fireplace. I documented everything. I even took a video of the smoke detector going off inside. Then I called the fire department, not to start a scene, but because I wanted an official report. When the guy came out and saw the blockage, he looked at me like I was nuts. "You didn't install this yourself." "Why the hell would I cap off my own chimney in winter?" I said. He made a report, took his own photos, and told me I was lucky the smoke hadn't backed up more. "Could have had carbon monoxide issues," he warned. Exactly 3 hours later, while I was reviewing my security footage from the night before, I saw her. Nancy. In her ridiculous windbreaker with the HOA logo on the back. She was on my property with a ladder and a man I didn't recognize, probably one of her cronies from the HOA board. They capped my chimney at 2 in the morning. I nearly crushed my coffee mug in my hand. That afternoon, she showed up at my door like nothing had happened. Knocked 3 times, sharp and impatient, like she owned the place. "Paxton," she said, her voice sugary and smug, "we had to take action. You failed to pay your quarterly HOA dues and the seasonal compliance surcharges. The board voted to enforce a temporary heating restriction until your balance is resolved." I stared at her. "You blocked my chimney because I didn't pay your made-up fees." She folded her arms. "The bylaws allow us to take corrective action when residents endanger the visual harmony of the neighborhood." "What the hell does that have to do with my fireplace?" "You were burning wood that left a dark residue on your chimney exterior," she said, like that sentence made any sense. "It's unsightly, and you're delinquent." "I'm not paying for visual harmony, Nancy, that's not a thing," she sniffed. "Well, you'll be hearing from our legal counsel." "Perfect," I said, smiling for the first time all day. "I've got footage of you trespassing and tampering with my property." "You'll be hearing from mine too." Her face twitched just a little, then she spun on her heel and stormed off. I spent the next 2 days gathering everything. The fire department report, the footage. Screenshots of the HOA's nonsense fees. They'd been voting on random charges in closed meetings and slapping them onto homeowner accounts without any transparency. I even found a neighbor who'd been charged $75 for having overly festive Halloween inflatables. I wasn't the only one sick of it. I knocked on doors. I listened. I made a list of stories. And I found something even better. Nancy had been authorizing maintenance jobs through a contractor who, surprise, surprise, turned out to be her nephew. Overbilled, underdelivered, and paid with HOA funds. By the weekend, I had more than enough to file a suit. Not just over the chimney, but over everything. Misuse of HOA funds, illegal trespass, endangerment, harassment, and violation of state fire codes. I didn't just go to a lawyer. I went to someone better, my cousin Ryan, a pit bull civil litigator who loved nothing more than burying petty tyrants in paperwork. She blocked your chimney, Ryan said, flipping through the photos. That's not just civil, that's criminal. You could have died, that's what I told her. Oh, we're suing, he said, but first we're filing a restraining order, then we're calling the police. I smiled. You think they'll actually arrest her? Ryan raised an eyebrow. She capped your chimney during active winter use. That's tampering with a residential heating system and trespassing with intent to damage. You bet they will. By Monday, I had my paperwork ready, and I wasn't alone. 4 other neighbors had agreed to file affidavits about similar harassment from Nancy and her HOA board. One of them, a retired nurse named Donna, said Nancy once threatened to fine her for excessively aromatic cooking when she cooked curry. Nancy had messed with the wrong block. I walked into the HOA office, really just a rented-out corner in the neighborhood clubhouse, with a folder under my arm and a smile on my face. She was there, of course, pretending to be busy on her laptop. "Can I help you, Mr. Vellman?" she said without looking up. I dropped the folder on the table. "Legal notice, you'll want to read that carefully. There's a restraining order in there and a civil suit. Enjoy." She stared at the folder like it was on fire. "I warned you," I said. "Now it's your turn to pay." And for the first time since I moved into Willow Creek, Nancy Harrow had nothing to say. The next morning, I was standing in my front yard, sipping on a lukewarm protein shake and watching a city code enforcement officer measure the distance between Nancy Harrow's mailbox and the curb. I hadn't called them yet, but apparently someone else had. Word was spreading. Fast. The folder I dropped off at the HOA office had done more than rattle Nancy. It cracked open something deeper: years of frustration from neighbors who'd been bullied into silence. I hadn't expected it to turn into a movement overnight, but when people started knocking on my door asking for copies of my footage and legal filings, I didn't hesitate. One of them was Miguel Alvarez, who lived 2 houses down. He was a former Navy aviation mechanic, quiet but sharp-eyed. He'd once installed a motion sensor system that could probably track raccoons from 100 feet. He had footage too of Nancy dumping what looked like fertilizer on his front lawn last summer after he refused to repaint his garage door beige. "She said it didn't match the community theme," Miguel told me, shaking his head. "I've had the same color for 9 years." I uploaded his video into a shared folder along with mine. By midweek, we had 6 detailed records of Nancy or someone from the HOA board trespassing, tampering, or threatening homeowners. One woman, an elderly widow named Mrs. Keene, had a recording of Nancy telling her that if she didn't remove her wind chimes, she'd be reported to Adult Protective Services for diminished capacity. I stopped sleeping properly, not because I was anxious, but because I couldn't stop reading. HOA statutes, municipal codes, even case law from nearby counties where similar associations had been decertified after abuse of power. It was like pulling a loose thread and realizing the whole sweater was unraveling. On Thursday, Officer Delaney from the local precinct knocked on my door. He was tall and lean, with a long face and a tone like sandpaper. "You submitted a report about an unauthorized obstruction on your chimney," he asked. Along with video footage, a fire department assessment, and a notarized statement from my attorney, I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Mind if I take a look at the footage myself?" I led him into the den, pulled up the clip, and hit play. Nancy and her crony climbing up my ladder in the middle of the night, bolting down the cap with a cordless driver. Delaney didn't say a word until it ended. "You know this woman personally. She's the HOA president." He exhaled through his nose. "You're aware this qualifies as criminal trespass and tampering with a residential safety system under Code Section 7842. That's why I called you. He nodded slowly. All right, we'll need to bring her in for questioning. If we find cause, charges will be filed. This isn't just some neighborly dispute, this is borderline felony obstruction. I want a restraining order in place immediately, I said. You'll need to file that with the municipal court. But I'll include it in my report. Expect someone from the DA's office to follow up. I watched him walk down my driveway and make a call from his cruiser. I didn't know who he was talking to, but I knew things were finally moving. That night, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. They tried to do it quietly, but word got out. Half the neighborhood showed up on the clubhouse lawn. They hadn't even unlocked the doors. People brought folding chairs. Someone set up a little speaker and played yacht rock at half volume. It was surreal, a tailgate party for legal reckoning. Miguel handed out printed packets of the bylaws, highlighting all the clauses Nancy had violated. In 4 different colors, no less. Eventually, Nancy arrived. She pulled up in her white crossover like she was arriving at a charity gala, wearing a navy blazer and heels that didn't belong anywhere near a patch of grass. She didn't make it 10 steps before someone shouted her name. "Nancy, why don't you tell us why you blocked Paxton's chimney?" That came from Donna, the retired nurse with the curry incident. She was holding a clipboard like it was a gavel. Nancy tried to wave it off. "This is a private board meeting. Homeowners who haven't paid their dues aren't entitled to..." "Wrong," said Miguel, stepping forward. Section 316. Any homeowner may attend open board meetings unless under legal restriction or temporary injunction, neither of which apply here, though I expect they soon will. Nancy looked like someone had just thrown a pie in her face. Her eyes darted from person to person, searching for backup. There was none. "I'm not going to stand here and be ambushed by a mob," she said. "No one's ambushing you," I said, stepping into the circle. "We're holding you accountable. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just bitter because you couldn't follow the rules." "I follow real rules," I said, "not the ones you invent to shake people down." She turned and stormed into the clubhouse. The door locked behind her with a mechanical click. 2 days later, she was arrested. It happened in the middle of the afternoon. I was fixing the hinges on my back gate when I heard the sirens. A single patrol car pulled up to the curb in front of her house. Delaney got out with another officer and knocked on her door. She answered in a bathrobe, talking fast and waving her hands like she was trying to swat away bad news. It didn't work. They cuffed her on the porch. No resistance, but plenty of shouting about unfair targeting and vindictive neighbors. Someone down the street recorded the whole thing. By nightfall, the video was on the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Queen of the HOA dethroned." The next week was chaos. The HOA board tried to distance themselves, issuing a bland statement about individual actions not reflecting the values of the association. But no one was buying it. We'd found too much. The bogus fees, the private votes, the nepotism contracts, every bit of it was documented. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Miguel filed another with the State HOA Oversight Bureau. Donna and 2 others delivered notarized petitions calling for a full audit of the board's financial records. We got over 70 signatures in 3 days out of 112 houses. On Friday, I received a letter from the DA's office. They were pursuing charges against Nancy for criminal mischief, trespassing, and reckless endangerment. They'd also opened a secondary investigation into misuse of HOA funds. Based on the material we'd submitted, Ryan, my cousin, was already prepping the civil case. He called me that afternoon with an update. "We've got a court date in 6 weeks. She's hired a defense attorney, but their response so far is weak. No denial of events, just a claim that she was acting in her official capacity. She'll try to throw the whole board under the bus," I said. "Let her. It'll speed up the decertification process. Once the judge sees how she weaponized the HOA rules, they'll have no choice but to dissolve the board." I sat down on the porch steps, watching the sun roll down the hill. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt calm, almost peaceful, but I wasn't done. I started drafting a new proposal, one that would replace the current HOA structure with a voluntary civic committee. Transparent, accountable, no power to fine. Just neighborhood volunteers who wanted to keep the place clean and safe. Donna agreed to help draft the charter. Miguel offered to design a secure online voting system. Even Mrs. Keene signed on, offering to host a monthly coffee hour so residents could talk openly, no agendas, no threats. Nancy's reign was over. But what mattered more was what came next. We weren't just ending something broken. We were building something better. Together, the morning after Nancy's arrest, I found a folded piece of paper taped to my front door, no envelope. Just a single sheet typed with jagged scissor cuts along the edge. It read like a warning dressed up as a plea. Dear Mr. Velman, it began, we urge you to consider the long-term consequences of your current course of action. The integrity of the Willow Creek community depends on cohesion, not conflict. We respectfully request you withdraw your legal complaints and allow the HOA board to resolve these matters internally. It was unsigned. I stepped back from the door and scanned the street. A few neighbors were walking their dogs. Someone was trimming hedges 2 houses down. Everything looked normal, but the message was anything but. It wasn't from Nancy. She was still in county holding, awaiting arraignment, but someone else on the board was clearly trying to patch things up in secret. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I added the letter to the growing folder of evidence and forwarded a scan to Ryan. Later that afternoon, I met with 2 city auditors in the clubhouse. They'd been sent by the county's Office of Community Governance, following the formal complaints we'd submitted. The place still reeked of lavender air freshener and old printer toner, but there was something refreshing about seeing city officials sitting at the same table where Nancy used to dictate fines over non-compliant lawn edging. One of the auditors, a woman named Latasha, tapped a manila folder against the table. We've found anomalies in the HOA's financial records, she said. Specifically, over 50 disbursements labeled as beautification initiatives with no receipts, no contractor invoices, and no resident approval. That sounds about right, I said, flipping open my notebook. I've got screenshots of the board's online portal. Most of those votes never showed up in the minutes. Her partner, a gray-haired man named Leonard, raised his glasses. There's also a recurring payment made to a company called Trident Home Aesthetics. This company doesn't exist in the state's contractor registry. We traced the account. It's a Shell LLC registered at a P.O. box in the next town over. I leaned forward. Who owns the LLC? Leonard glanced down at his papers. Ronald Harrow, her husband. I laughed once, loud and short. She kept saying the HOA was a family effort. I didn't realize she meant literally. The auditors didn't laugh. Latasha slid a paper across the table. This is a formal request for homeowner statements. We'll be submitting a full report to the county district attorney next week. Based on what we've seen so far, this may qualify as organized misuse of community funds. If you and the other residents are willing to testify, we can expedite the investigation. We're ready, I said. Just give us the time and place. Outside, the January wind was starting to bite harder. I zipped up my jacket and headed home, only to find Miguel waiting on my porch. She's out, he said without greeting me. Nancy posted bail this morning. Already, she came back around 10. No one's seen her since. But get this, someone tried to access the HOA digital archives this afternoon. Donna's friend works in the IT department for the management software company. She got a ping from an unauthorized login attempt. She's trying to wipe the records, I said. Miguel nodded. Or at least edit enough to muddy the water. Too late for that. We didn't talk long. He had to pick up his daughter, and I had to prepare documents for the upcoming community vote. The plan was simple. Dissolve the HOA and establish a new civic council with zero enforcement power. No fees, no fines, only voluntary participation. But before we could vote, We had to nullify the existing bylaws, many of which Nancy had pushed through during small, poorly advertised meetings. That night, I went through the old meeting records with a fine-toothed comb. Most of the documents were vague, padded with filler language about seasonal cohesion and neighborhood harmony. But one entry caught my eye. It was a vote labeled Emergency Compliance Resolution ECR 6, passed by 3 board members, all of whom had since resigned. It gave the HOA president the authority to take direct action to ensure immediate community compliance with any and all aesthetic mandates. I highlighted the line and sent it to Ryan. The next morning he called me. "That clause is your gold mine," he said. "It's vague, abusive, and it won't hold up in court. No judge is going to accept aesthetic mandates as justification for endangering someone's life. That language alone is enough to argue for dissolution by judicial order." By now, the neighborhood was fully mobilized. Donna ran a sign-up sheet for volunteers to canvass door to door, ensuring every homeowner knew about the upcoming vote. Miguel built a secure file drop system where residents could submit their own evidence or reports. Even Mrs. Keene, who rarely left her porch, sat outside with a thermos of cider and collected signatures from anyone who passed. Then, on Sunday, something new happened. A black sedan pulled into my driveway just after noon. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out holding a briefcase. He was tall, with a clean-shaven jaw and a voice like someone who'd spent too many years saying things that weren't true. "Mr. Velman," he said, "I represent the legal interests of Willow Creek's Homeowners Association. Are you here to apologize?" I asked. He didn't smile. "I'm authorized to offer a settlement. If you agree to drop your civil suit and cease public criticism of the board, the HOA will waive all outstanding charges against you, remove any disciplinary notations on your file, and provide a written apology for the Chimney incident." I stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. "That's cute," I said, "but I'm not interested in walking away. I already filed for HOA dissolution. The county's reviewing it next week. You want this to go away? Tell your clients to resign and refund every fake fee they collected." The man's jaw flexed. "You understand this could be a lengthy legal process. Your neighbors may lose interest before it concludes." I didn't look away. "Try me." He left without another word. But that night, someone spray-painted "traitor" on my mailbox. I didn't call the cops. I just replaced the box with a metal one and installed a motion-triggered camera above it. The footage showed a teenager in a hoodie, someone's kid, probably. A last-ditch intimidation tactic. It didn't work. By Wednesday, we had enough signatures to force a binding vote. The county officials scheduled a community-wide meeting at the high school auditorium. Not just for the vote, but for the presentation of findings from the audit. They wanted it public, transparent. On the night of the vote, nearly every homeowner showed up. The auditorium buzzed with quiet tension. People whispered, eyes darted. The HOA board sat in the front row, expressionless. Nancy wasn't there. Latasha went first, reading from a stack of papers. Over the past 5 years, the Willow Creek HOA collected over $270,000 in fees. Of that, more than $50,000 was spent on undocumented services handled through shell companies. The pattern of disbursement strongly suggests coordinated misappropriation of community funds. There were gasps. One woman stood up and said, "I gave up my vacation last year to pay those fines." Leonard stepped forward next. "Furthermore, we've identified voting irregularities in 14 separate policy changes. These include backdated meeting minutes, forged digital signatures, and approval of measures during improperly convened sessions." Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, unfolded a single piece of paper, and said only this: "We deserve better than fear disguised as order. Let's take our neighborhood back." The vote wasn't even close. 91-12 in favor of dissolution. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine and silence. No warnings on my door, no threats in my mailbox. Just the sound of kids playing basketball 2 doors down and the faint smell of someone grilling sausages at noon. Nancy's criminal case was still working through the system, but her power was gone. Her name was stripped from every communal document. Her cronies resigned before they could be removed. And the new civic council, it formed a week later with Donna as chair, Miguel as tech liaison, and Mrs. Keene as honorary greeter. I didn't take a position. I didn't need one. I just fixed my fence, cleaned out my fireplace, and waved to my neighbors without wondering who'd be sending me a fine tomorrow. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others with paperwork, patience, and a well-placed security camera. This one. It ended exactly the way it should have, with the truth on record and the tyrants out of power. The official dissolution of the Willow Creek HOA didn't come with a parade or even a press release. But on the morning the county judge signed the order, the neighborhood group chat lit up like fireworks. Someone posted a picture of the signed decree taped to the inside of the old HOA bulletin board, right where Nancy used to pin her passive-aggressive reminders about seasonal alignment and garbage can visibility. No more fines. No more unannounced inspections. No more Nancy. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. 2 weeks after the vote, Ryan called me from the courthouse. "You might want to come down here," he said. The DA just filed additional charges against Nancy and 2 former board members' embezzlement, fraudulent contracting, and falsifying municipal records. I was already halfway out the door before he finished talking. When I arrived, Ryan was standing outside the clerk's office with a folder under one arm and a look that said he was halfway between furious and impressed. "They found a hidden account," he said, flipping open the folder. "Buried under the name Willow Community Wellness Fund, it's been skimming 5% off every HOA payment for the last 3 years. "Let me guess," I said. "Another shell company, worse, it's real, but it never held a single event. No community wellness programs, no newsletters, no meetings. Just one debit card used almost exclusively for travel, boutique purchases, and a few meals at a steakhouse across town." I leaned against the wall, jaw set. "How much did they steal?" "Just under $78,000, he said. "Enough to trigger felony-level theft charges under the state code. The DA's office is preparing to seize assets." "Good," I said. "They owe every last cent." Ryan handed me a copy of the full indictment. The second I saw Nancy's signature on the funding transfer forms, sloppy and rushed, like she'd signed them on the back of a receipt, I knew she was cooked. And she wasn't going down alone. One of her former board allies, a man named Carter Benson, had already flipped. He gave a statement to the DA in exchange for a plea deal. According to the transcript, Nancy orchestrated the entire scheme, pressuring board members to approve community development expenses without oversight. Carter admitted he'd never even seen the full budget breakdown. "She told us the less we knew, the safer we'd be," he said in the affidavit. That week, subpoenas went out to every contractor who'd ever worked with the HOA. Most of them were legitimate small-time lawn care crews and seasonal decorators, but one stood out. A landscaping company that billed for monthly services during the winter, when no work was done. The owner claimed he'd been paid to stay on call, but couldn't produce a single invoice for actual labor. The DA's office traced the payments to a joint account held by Nancy and her husband, Ronald Harrow. It was the same one used to operate Trident Home Aesthetics, the fake firm that had billed the HOA for phantom sidewalk power washing and chimney soot mitigation. I dropped that detail into the community chat with a single sentence. Turns out the soot was just a cover story. People started calling it Chimneygate. The local news picked it up next. A short segment on the evening broadcast, complete with stock footage of suburban streets, courthouse steps, and a single blurry photo of Nancy in sunglasses entering a bail hearing. They didn't use her name, but everyone in Willow Creek knew exactly who it was. What followed wasn't revenge, it was restoration. The county appointed a temporary financial overseer to audit and refund misused funds. Residents who'd paid for seasonal surcharges and aesthetic compliance began receiving reimbursement checks in the mail. They weren't huge, most were under $200, but the symbolism mattered more than the amount. Donna organized a New Dawn block party in the strip of grass where the old HOA sign used to stand. She invited everyone, even the people who had once voted in favor of Nancy's policies. No speeches, no finger-pointing, just music, potluck tables, and neighbors finally talking to each other like people instead of suspects. I showed up with a tray of ribs and a cooler full of iced tea. Miguel brought his grill and blasted classic rock from a Bluetooth speaker that looked like a cinder block. Mrs. Keene handed out homemade lemon bars wrapped in wax paper. At one point, I caught sight of a man standing near the edge of the lawn, watching quietly. He wore a gray windbreaker and looked like he was trying to disappear into the hedges. I didn't recognize him at first. It was Ronald Harrow. He didn't speak to anyone. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, as if he was waiting for something, maybe an apology, maybe a miracle. He didn't get either. Eventually, he turned and walked away. The next week, he was indicted alongside Nancy. Money laundering and conspiracy to defraud a homeowners association. The final courtroom hearing took place 3 months later. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching as Nancy stood before the judge. Her hair was darker now, no more platinum perfection, and her suit looked off the rack. She didn't make eye contact with anyone in the room. The prosecutor laid out the charges in a calm, deliberate voice. Fraud, reckless endangerment, misappropriation of community funds, unauthorized tampering with safety systems. The judge listened without expression, tapping a pen against his legal pad. When it came time for Nancy to speak, her voice barely carried past the second row. She didn't deny what she'd done. She didn't apologize either. Instead, she said something that stuck with me, not because it was profound, but because it revealed everything. "I just wanted the neighborhood to look the way it used to," she said, "before people stopped caring. Before they started painting their doors weird colors and leaving trash cans out too long." The judge didn't respond. He simply read the sentencing terms. 18 months probation, 6 months house arrest, full restitution, and a permanent ban from serving on any housing or neighborhood committee in the state. No handcuffs. No jail time, but her influence, gone. After the hearing, Ryan and I walked out into the spring sunlight. The wind was picking up, tossing flower petals across the courthouse steps. "She'll probably write a letter to the editor," I said. "Let her," Ryan replied. "No one's listening anymore." Back home, things kept improving. The new civic council held open meetings in the library every month. Attendance wasn't mandatory, but people showed up anyway, not because they were afraid of fines, but because they finally had a say. Miguel presented a proposal to start a community garden in the vacant lot near the north end of the neighborhood. Donna pushed for a tool-sharing program to help with home repairs. Even Mrs. Keene joined in, offering to host a historical archive of the neighborhood's early days. One evening, I stood on my roof again, just like the day I discovered the capped chimney. Only this time it was to fix a loose shingle. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. Everything was quiet except for a dog barking in the distance and the faint sound of a basketball bouncing somewhere down the street. No smoke. No strange smells. Just air clean and free. I climbed down, wiped my hands on a rag, and walked inside. The fireplace was lit, the fire crackling gently behind the screen. I sat down on the couch, took a long breath, and realized something I hadn't in years. The house felt like mine again, not just the bricks and beams, but the space it took up in the world. The way the windows caught the light. The sound of the floor settling just after sunset. It wasn't being watched anymore. It was being lived in. And that, more than any courtroom ruling or community vote, was the real victory. Because there's nothing more dangerous to a petty tyrant than a neighbor who knows the rules, keeps the receipts, and refuses to back down, especially when he's got a ladder, a camera, and a cousin with a law degree.